So the first one is black to play. Black to play. Black pieces, king f3, pawn f4, then white pieces, king on d3, pawn on a4, and rook g2. So this is the first position. So it's 1 point for the correct guess, and then 2 points for the reason why.
Yeah, I see a blank board in front of me.
You see a blank board?
Yeah, I don't see any pieces yet.
Yes, this is blindfold puzzles. So I wrote there on the notepad. Do you see the notepad on the right?
No, I don't see. I see the two videos. Okay, now I see. I just moved the two videos.
Oh, okay. Yes.
All right. So I see the notepad now. Okay. So now black knight f3 and pawn f4, and white is king d3, pawn f4, and rook g2.
Yes.
So so it's a black to play.
Yes, it's black to play.
Okay. So I'll play king takes rook g2.
Okay, so 1 point for the correct guess. What is the reason why you are playing king takes g2?
Well, I'm getting a free rook.
Yeah, that's correct. That's the 1 point. That's correct. That's all 3 points. But yeah, there's another reason also. The opposition will be winning, actually. The end game is winning. After you take that pawn, the rook, sorry, the end game will be winning for black. Because white is unfortunate.
Yeah.
That they are king.
You will, yeah. You will send me that that position, because that's my first ever blindfold chess puzzle. So,
oh wow! Okay, no, yeah, I can say
I never did blindfold chess before.
Oh well, so that's good. Okay, we are doing something new. Yeah, but this is very useful. Blindfold chess, very useful. You'll see the effect on it, because it forces you to think ahead, because and also to visualize what you are doing.
Mm-hmm.
I think I don't know what grandmaster or whatever thing I read about blindfold chess, but when I was convinced that this is useful, I downloaded an application on Play Store, blindfold puzzles, and I started devouring through these things, and it's been very useful, helpful, very helpful. So in this position, black to play.
Black to play. I'll play knight f6.
Okay, knight f6. Good. 1 point for the correct guess. What is the idea behind knight f6?
Forking the king and the bishop on h5.
Correct. Okay, all 3 points. And then this one allows you to be able to capture the bishop, which gives you a drawn position. So black is able to save the game by finding this tactic. So yeah, knight f6 check, making a double attack or fork. And now the king must move somewhere. And now this is a draw because of insufficient mating material. Right, the last one, then we'll start how to think like a strong player. Like to play king b5, knight to c5, king e5, bishop f2, bishop f3. Like to play
I'll play knight d3.
knight d3, 1 point for the correct guess. So what is the idea behind knight d3?
Same idea like the last one, forking the king and to capture one bishop for a drawn position.
Yes, very good. Okay, 9 out of 9. Good job. Very simple positions to start with. So it progresses these ones. So we've started so far on level 1 where there are 5 pieces, and these are the end game ones. So the application I use here, it has 2 sets. It is end game blindfold puzzles, and then it also has like opening blindfold puzzles. So yeah, this is the correct idea. Knight d3 check, king must go here, and then knight takes, it's a draw. Okay, good. So that's a good way to start off the lesson.
Dion, you will send me those 3 positions?
Okay, I can share them with you, yes.
Okay, or will I get it through the recording?
Also, yeah, that you can get them from the recording, but yeah, that's fine.
Okay. All right.
So now let's begin with the start of our, it's gone too big again. I just need to minimize it. All right. So let's look at today's lesson goals. Number 1, how to think like strong player. 2, prophylactic thinking. Yeah, so this is my passion as a coach is usually to change the thinking of the player. If you change the player's thinking, you change the player. Because
and I think before meeting you, Dion, I think that was my wish, because I know that I was playing my style of play the same way and being losing a lot of games. And I know I needed to change my thinking, but I did not know how. And this is why I wanted to seek a counseling, a coaching, like to change that way of thinking. I think you've made a good diagnosis of my weaknesses. And secondly, one thing that I would like to tell you, John, is when I've played my 5 games, it was 50 minutes and I think 20 seconds increment for each move.
Yes.
But I've played very rapidly in those games. I remember 1 or 2 games I finished in like 20 minutes, 30 moves. My game was already over, and my other players were on 12 move or 16 move. So I did not spend time to think on the positions and made instant moves and made blunders.
Yeah, and that's correct. Usually, it's when one thinks, particularly with a long time, and this time we are speaking the same language, because this was always my problem, is playing too fast. I used to play extremely fast, and then I'll just make very simple mistakes. Because of course, no matter how good you are on intuition, chess ultimately is a game of the brain, and if you are not thinking, we are shortchanging ourselves at some point. So,
because in one of the 5 games, there is one game where I've lost a knight on move 6, and on move 6 I've lost the game because of that move.
Yeah, and it's difficult. I mean, already when you make a blunder out of the opening, it's usually, and these are players that usually can punish you for making a mistake. I mean, it's usually fine if you blunder against a 1,000 rated player, you can come back.
Yeah.
But if you blunder against a higher player, the chances are very difficult.
Yeah.
Right. So what you should know already. So what is a threat in chess?
A threat, a capture. My opponent is threatening to capture my piece. My opponent will check me or will checkmate me. That's a threat. Or maybe a double attack or a fork or a pin, a tactic. Double attacks.
Yeah. Okay, very good. So what you should get out of this lesson? Number 1, the 2 most important questions to ask during a chess game. That's number 1. So these questions are: focus on the last move of the opponent. Last move of the opponent, and ask yourself, what does my opponent want to do? The move is, be careful before making your own move. 12 is my move. This is called the blunder check. The grandmasters call this the blunder check, or how to find the ways the opponent can refute your move. And what does my opponent want to do is a key question. It falls under this one, prophylactic thinking, which is just a fancy word for nothing, which means preventing something bad. Preventing something bad from happening. And in our cases, usually it's making a one move blunder or losing a pawn and things like this. So prophylactic, preventing something bad from happening. So it is a way of thinking that can be used in every position, whether in attacking positions or defensive positions. Now, usually the many players become put off when they hear prophylactic because they think, I don't want to defend. But there is many examples where prophylactic defense is used in attacking positions. You are basically preventing something bad from happening. If you are winning, what is an example of something bad that you would want to prevent from happening if you are winning during a game?
Losing my winning advantage.
Exactly, right? So in that way, you are using prophylactic thinking. How can I prevent my opponent from getting counterplay? How can I prevent that? So even in an attacking position, you can still use prophylactic thinking. And usually this is the best players in the world are very good at this topic of prophylactic thinking. They use it a lot. The greatest chess coach, in the opinion of many players and very strong players as well, Mark Dvoretsky, who passed away some years ago now, he was teaching this topic very seriously to everyone he worked with, prophylactic thinking. He believed that this was the most important thing to teach in chess, or at least one of the most important ways to train. It's funny because he himself understood this personally, because he was an international master, but he never really made it far as a chess player because he was always impatient and he never really liked to think. So he discovered his passion was more. Sorry.
What's his name?
Mark Dvoretsky.
Okay, like the endgame book manual.
Yes, it's the endgame manual. Yeah. So he realized that he himself was not a very strong player because he was always impatient and he would make such mistakes. But he discovered his passion was really more to coach. And that's one of the main things he taught was prophylactic thinking. So basically, it has two questions. Prophylaxis has two main questions. Two main questions. The first one is, what does my opponent want to do, and what would they play now if it was their move? What would they play now if it was their move? Very important question. You give the opponent a move and you try to figure out what would they play right now if it was their turn to move. So if you can't find their plan, what does my opponent want to do? You usually want to see, do they have any direct threats? Do they have any maneuver, right? Some plan to win an advantage that you should be seeing. And if you still can't see it, you turn the board around. You sit as your opponent and ask, what would they play now if it was their move? And then, of course, finally, practice and skill, which is what we'll try to do in today's practice and skill. We'll start with some very simple positions, because usually the best way to teach any chess concept, any idea, is to first start with some basic examples that are very easy, and then we start to go from there. So let's start with some of those. So I'll set up some diagrams.
I have a question, Dion.
Yes.
I see now 4 questions. There are 2 prophylaxis questions, and there are 2 questions before that.
Yes.
So those 4 questions, do I need to ask that questions after every move?
That's a very good question.
So my player, my opponent just make their move. So it's my turn to play. So each time when it is my turn to play, do I ask those 4 questions each time to make my thinking process before making my best move?
Well, that will be the start. The start is to do it every time, but it's like riding a bicycle. When you have started it, it will start to get easier. But for now, these ones, I just wanted to show where we are getting this from. The ones I primarily teach are these ones. These ones you don't really have to ask yourself for now. We are simply going to strictly focus on this.
So it's a 2-step process, a 2-step question.
Yes.
Each time where it's my turn to play,
yes,
I try to find the answer and the solutions for those 2 questions, which will help me to make my best move.
Definitely, that is correct. Because when we focus on the last move of the opponent, we already have some information about what they want to do. And then we just need to ask ourselves, what does the opponent want to do? And then finally, before we make a move, before we decide our best move, we must be careful now and ask, is my move a blunder? How can the opponent punish me if I play that move? But this is these ideas are born out of this big topic in chess, which is called prophylaxis. But for now, we are strictly learning only these 2. These other ones are just there to show where this is coming from. It's not, I'm not just making these things up. It's a whole topic that is really important in chess, particularly at the moment. The former world champion Vladimir Kramnik released a course on Chessable, teaching this very thing of how to think in chess. With part of it, he was covering this prophylaxis. So let's start now with this diagram. So in this position, it is white to move. So the first thing to find out is, what does my opponent want to do? Because here we can't focus on the last move because it's a puzzle. So we
can't focus on the last move.
Yes. So we can only start with, what does my opponent want to do?
So I'm white or I'm black?
You are playing with white here.
I'm playing with white, so my opponent is black.
Yes.
I think he wants to capture my knight with the rook.
Yes. So now, what would you play now if you were to play this position?
I think I won't be able to move my knight. So I think the best thing is to defend my knight with b4.
Yes. And before you can verify it's not a blunder, like for instance, these ones you can already say they are blunders. Be careful before making your move. Is my move a blunder? Yes, my opponent just captures. The same here, they just capture. The same there. So there's only one correct move, which is before. Very good. So this way, you already avoid obvious mistakes by just basically looking at those details. And now let's look at another position. Because usually this is another thing I can just drop whilst I'm setting up this position. It's not about thinking too fast or thinking too slow. It's about thinking effectively. That is the secret to correct chess thinking. thinking effectively. And only when we have a thought process can we think effectively. So this is the next position. You're playing with white and your opponent is black. So here, the first thing to be focusing on is what does the opponent want to do?
I think in this position, I would rather think what I want to do.
Okay, but you have at least registered that the opponent wants to capture the bishop. That's fine.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay, I did not see that.
Oh, you see now, that's the first thing that we need to address, because you must always be concerned about the opponent's moves first. Then only then you can come up with a plan. But before you see what
because my thinking process, just by seeing that position, my first thought was to play h4.
Yeah.
And go for the queen.
Yeah. But it will turn out the move is correct when you make it, but you had not considered knight takes f1. So say it turns out in the game, but now you see how these two questions work together. These ones. If you miss the first one, you can help yourself with the second one. Be careful before making your move. Is my move a blunder? So even if you did not ask yourself the first one, and you just ask yourself the second question, and you hadn't even seen knight f1, before you played h4, you just stop to verify, okay, knight takes h5, the knight won't catch the bishop. So you can go ahead and play h4. So these two moves are trying to help you to make less blunders, because that's the one thing we must also be clear about. The blunders are going to happen. See, I think who said this, Savieli Tatakova, the blunders are there on the chessboard waiting to be made. So both you and your opponent, both me and my opponent, we are all going to blunder. It's just about how can we make less blunders and avoid especially the painful blunders where we just lose material. So here in this position, we can at least ignore the threat because we see it's not a real threat. That's also an important thing to drop here. So for now, with prophylaxis, we can put it to the side. Let's at least go a bit deeper here. So this is just like a bonus tip. We want to defend real threats only. That's the only thing that you should stop and change your position for. Only when the opponent makes real threats. What are some examples of real threats that you can give?
Well, if I'm going to be checkmate, that's a real threat, or it's going to capture my queen.
Definitely. Right. So that is the first and most important thing. When we ask, what does my opponent want to do? We want to defend real threats only. If it's not a real threat, we mustn't waste our time. We can go right ahead with making our plan. So this is what I was saying, like thinking this way is not a passive way to think. White is winning here. White is up with the bishop and they have an outside pass pawn. But white still needs to be careful and make sure they verify that their opponent's threats cannot ruin their position. So even with an attacking mindset, we still will do wise to ask ourselves what the opponent wants to do, because then we can ensure that we don't throw away our winning advantage. Because here now we see this is not a real threat. h4, if the opponent takes here, the pawn cannot be stopped anymore. So we don't have to worry too much about this line. We can stop calculating here because we see that the knight won't be able to catch up. If the knight tries, it's always going to be slow because the knight's worst nightmare is the rook pawn. The rook pawn is the worst nightmare for the knight because it always struggles when it comes to that particular pawn.
So my guess was correct.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I said it earlier. The instinct was right, but in a real game, you can't take it for granted that it is right, because then.
But in this case, John, was a knight d2 a bad move?
No, 92 is a solid move. You can play 92 definitely. It's a solid move. It keeps the bishop and it still maintains an advantage. But just to introduce this topic of defending real threats only, here we don't really need to play 92 because we can see it's not a real threat. Knight takes f1 because of our bigger threat. Because if we are carrying big threats, then the opponent must, this is counter-attacking chess. Our opponent is threatening 3 points. We are threatening to make a queen. So our threat is more powerful than their threat. So we can continue forcing our game on the opponent. So let's look at the next example. And then, yeah, I think we'll look at 4 more simple positions, and we'll look at some games. Example by Master Games. So we see how the grandmasters use these kinds of things in their games. But it cannot be said enough how important getting the right thinking process is, because that is really the difference. Usually, that I'm sure you have heard this quote before, that chess is 99% calculation, and it's true. Of course, it's exaggerated, but it basically means this: the person that wins is the best calculator. If you calculate better than your opponents, you are going to win. Chess is lost because of calculation mistakes. Either I miss a tactic or I miss a checkmate. So the person who calculates better wins chess 99% of the time. It's only the 1% when someone loses, even though they are better at calculating by, I don't know, being flagged or losing on time. But in general, the person who calculates wins more games. So here it is what you're playing with white, your opponent is black. So find the best continuation. So maybe now walk me through your thinking process out loud. Tell me what you are thinking out loud, and let's see.
I'm thinking to trap the knight because my bishop is already controlling 2 squares for the knight jump, and my king is already controlling 2 other squares for the knights. So my first process was try to capture the bishop or the c5 pawn so that I can go through. I think that's my plan. That's my plan to start with, either to capture the pawn on c5 or to trap the knight, because I'm already controlling at least 1, 2, 3, 4 squares of the knight. So I think I can bring my king to attack. I think my king would do very well on d5.
Okay.
I think I can move my king to d3, e4, and then d5.
Right.
I had to put my king more on the center and to have more control. I see now also that the knight is trying to capture my bishop.
Yes. So thank you so much for taking time to speak out loud, because that's the way to really learn how to someone thinks, right? So your mindset is focused on your plans, and that will be our first jump, is to achieve that together on how can we become more concerned about our opponent. So of course we can't focus on the last move, but we must worry what does the opponent want to do. Now you first came up with your plan, which is a good plan to try to win this pawn or to trap the knight somehow. But only now, before you could play, you realize, okay, king d3 won't work because of knight captures on a5. So this is my move a blunder. So at least you can avoid king d3 when you realize it's a blunder, because it gives a piece away. So that is a real threat. So now our focus changes entirely. We are winning, but we still need to think prophylactically. How can we prevent something bad from happening? The opponent is threatening something bad. So what would we now?
I will play knight to b3.
Right, and you see what is funny is this move, though it's defending, but it's a threat as well. It follows all those plans you were trying to make. The plan to attack c5, the pawn is under attack. Now, in fact, the opponent is even forced to take on a5, and now you'll be up with the knight in the endgame. Because if the opponent plays a move like king to a6, now simply bishop to c7, we are going to win that c5 pawn anyways. You see? So with that, thinking prophylactically, we prevent something bad from happening. What does the opponent want to do? We go knight b3. But at the same time, we are carrying on with our own plans. The plan is to win this pawn on c5. And the opponent is hopeless, can't defend against it. They are forced to take here. Their moves are limited. And now this endgame is just winning. We have an extra knight in this position. Right.
Yep.
So, but do you see now what I'm trying to get at with all of this?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so we have a few more positions, and then we'll see one example from master game. Okay, all the things are shifting to the left. This is the position. Okay, as well the king. So, okay, again, you are white to move. Your opponent is black.
So black is trying to capture my knight. That's a real threat. Now, it seems like my knight is being trapped. I don't have any squares to go. And I think the best thing for me would be to defend my knight with g3.
Very good. And this endgame is in fact winning for white. Because if black now, we have defended the real threat, but we continue imposing our game. That's also what I really want to insist on. I'm not teaching you to be a passive player or to be a defensive player, but to be an aggressive player who always imposes his game by snuffing out any counterplay of the opponent, by taking out any dangers from the opponent. Because now, if the opponent goes and captures, our plan prevails. We are up with a passed pawn on the outside, and this is winning for us. Because now, if black tries to be stubborn, we distract him with this pawn. And even if they give check, we just go and send here. At some point, black has to run after this pawn. As soon as they do that, we take this one, and white is winning this endgame. So by us playing prophylactically, we prevent something bad from happening. The knight is under attack, why not defend it? And now white continues with their own plans, and white's game is in control. And this is why, for instance, whenever players play against grandmasters, they struggle because the grandmasters are very resourceful. They are very good at stopping your plans so that their plans continue. They will make sure that you have no play, but they have play. So that's why they get used to this habit of figuring out what do you want to do and how should they stop you from doing that. So usually this also makes your decision making easier, because usually the most difficult thing in chess is to make decisions. But these two questions at least are trying to help you to make decisions better. They narrow your options. When you have less things to worry about, you can make decisions better. Because usually your answer to the question, what does my opponent want to do, narrows your options. You now have to choose from a few moves. So it also helps they improve better and quick decision making in the right moment. Right, okay. White to move again. Your opponent is black.
So there's no real threat. There's one threat. So king takes knight. So that's one threat. And my knight is lost because there's no safe square for the knight. I think what I will do is I can push the e-pawn and let my knight to be captured. So and try to make a queen.
Okay, so that's the one option. Now, before you play e4, what question must you ask yourself?
So my opponent will take my knight. My knight don't have any safe any safe square. I can put my knight on g3, then pawn takes and king takes, and then I will have 2 points to fight, the h pawn and the e pawn to push. So either one of my plan would be to go for e4. That's one of my candidate move. And my second move would be to place my knight on g3 so that black will double up the pawn and I can get the pawn back with the king.
Okay, so those are two candidate moves. But what other candidate move have you not considered that's better than those two? So the opponent is making a threat. So usually we want to defend real threats.
Okay. All right. I can do king g4.
Exactly. King g4 is the best move and is winning. We keep our knight and we keep the pass pawn. Because the other candidate was falling to this, captures where the pawn is not too far away from the king. The king is still in the square of the pawn. So it can catch this pawn very easily, right? Because the king can just come back quickly and stop it. But this move, this one was a little bit better. This was a good move, right? But there is a better move. Usually, Emmanuel Lasker, the second world chess champion, was famous for this. If you find a good move, find a better move. And when we learn the history of the man, we can believe him a little bit. He was a world champion for 26 or 27 years. So someone like that should be listened to. They know a thing or two. King g4 is the best move, wins the game on the spot. We defend the real threat and we make way for the pass pawn. This king is going to be distracted now and will take all these pawns and white is winning. Okay, last one and then we'll finish with the game. I must say, watching the games, one of the games that you won, your opponent managed to just give everything to you, you know.
Yeah. He actually he made more mistakes than me. I make more blunders than me.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
He just ended up giving the position away. But it's good also not to resign, because sometimes that's also what is I think is important as well. These people are higher rated, but you must have confidence. Sit on the board knowing this. Everyone is going to blunder. This is a fact. No one can run away from that. It is true. Everyone is going to blunder. The blunders are there on the board waiting to be made. It's just that how can we punish the opponent's mistakes before they punish ours? So, all right, I think this is the last one. We'll look at an example. Okay, so here you are white, and the opponent is black. What would you play here? How would you find the best continuation?
I'm trying to find a check. I have a queen, so I'm trying to find a check. Also, I'm trying to see where his queen will check me as well. He can check me on c1. If he check me on c3, my queen will capture. He's attacking my knight as well. I think I'll have to defend my knight or move my knight away. I think I'll have to defend because I'll have to defend my knight because the queen is also controlling some of the squares that my knight will jump to. I can't take his knight because that's being protected. I think one of my candidate move would be queen b2 to defend my knight. That's one consideration.
Yeah, and that is correct because here our options are limited somehow. The knight is attacked, and you have seen correctly. It can't really jump anywhere else. It's trapped everywhere. So we need to defend it. So this is the best move. So by means of this, we are at least eliminating all the clear blunders, trying to make less of them. And now we protect the knight, and white still maintains a healthy pawn structure. Black has doubled the isolated pawns, so white still maintains a chance. The former world champion Capablanca said, it's much easier to win from an equal position than from a losing position. So usually it's even better sometimes to keep the position equal in order to avoid just going into a lost continuation. But this one is solid. White keeps his knight, and the knight has healthy pawn structure. And yeah, the game will continue. Okay, so that was maybe a little bit of a walk into this kind of thinking. Focus on the last move of the opponent. Ask yourself this question: what does the opponent want to do? Be careful before making your move and ask yourself, is my move a blunder? So like I said, the first time it will be a manual thing to always constantly come back to it so that we create a habit. But when the habit is created, this will start happening on its own. In your head, you start to see it already. Your mind will think like that because it will be recorded in your subconscious mind, which, the grandmasters are always saying, I played without thinking, but they're not really saying they weren't thinking. Their minds think this way now. It just happens for them. But yeah, for us mere mortals, we still need to to practice it somehow. So let's look at one example from a man who was coined an unofficial world champion, Mr. Paul Charles Murphy. He was way ahead of his time. He was way ahead of his time. The things he understood in his time were just farther than anyone else. And this is an example of his that he played in 1849 in New Orleans, in America.
Murphy against who?
Against Rousseau. I hope I'm saying the other player's name right.
So Murphy is playing white?
Yes, Murphy is playing white. Let's go here. So this is the player, Eugene I think is it Rousseau? Yeah, so it's Eugene Rousseau.
Okay.
So the first name is Eugene. That's the last name that is here on the screen.
Yeah.
Okay. So Paul Morphy played the King's Gambit. It was a very popular opening this time because in this period, this is called the Romantic chess era. The most important thing was to checkmate the king, because these players understood that the goal in chess is to checkmate your king, so they only played for that. How can I checkmate the king in the most beautiful way possible? So here we're going to be looking at the examples of someone who loses because they are not asking these questions. They lost the game because they were not focusing on these two questions. Focus on the last move of the opponent and ask yourself, what does my opponent want to do? Be careful before making your move and ask yourself, is my move a blunder? And you'll see this game is very instructive. None of these pieces ever made a single move during the whole game. This will also help us when we look for openings, when we learn how to play in openings, because you must develop pieces in the opening. These pieces never developed. They stayed where they started. So after knight to g5, h6. Now, the opponent doesn't ask themselves after h6 this question, is my move a blunder? They don't have a smell of danger, right? Because they just get comfortable because they are up with the pawn. But then the opponent, Paul Morphy, sacrifices a knight to bring out the black king into the open. So the black neglected this question before making h6, is my move a blunder? So now this is a serious threat. It's a real threat. Our rook and our queen are attacked, so we must take, of course. Now the king is exposed. And now here, queen captures. The king is very exposed, threatening as well to play queen captures f4. So now he plays, at least here, he focused on the last move and asked, what does the opponent want to do? The opponent wants to capture queen f4. So he played queen f6, defending the f4 pawn. And now the opponent plays check. And check means look at your king. The reason why check is a forcing move, you must only look towards your king. Look to your king. When someone says check, they're telling you, look to your king. Right. So after check, the king moved away. And now the opponent plays knight to so we'll try to help Eugene here, who's playing with the black pieces. So focus on the last move of the opponent, knight to c3. What does the opponent want to do?
A fork with the king and the queen.
Exactly.
Knight d5.
Definitely. Right. And that's how what he saw, and he managed to see this and stop it by playing c6. c6 stopping knight d5. And now here, white played e5. Focus on the last move of the opponent. The opponent wants to capture our queen. It's a real threat, so we need to take that pawn. So he takes the pawn, and the opponent plays king to d1. Now, focus on the last move of the opponent. What does the opponent want to do?
So you mean white? What white wants to do?
Yes. So we're playing with black right now. So what does white want to do?
I can bring my rook on e1.
Yes, exactly. Right, and that would be a terrible position, would be pinned towards our king. So he noticed this and he moved out of the way. Now, notice white is playing with very powerful threats. Black cannot do anything but defend these threats. And that's why the opponent could not develop any pieces. And now black again makes a threat, threatening to capture the queen. The queen must move. Now, of course, the opponent does make a threat attacking our bishop, but at the same time, they have a piece that is not defended. So notice the knight was not developed, it had to be taken off the board. And now the opponent makes a blunder. They play d5 without asking themselves this question: is my move a blunder? They neglected the carefulness, right? Usually blunders are made because of carelessness. So that's why I write here, be careful before making your move and ask yourself, is my move a blunder? Blunders happen because of carelessness and oversights. That's how blunders happen in chess. So now after d5, what do you think white played now to punish this blunder? The thing that black did not see, what did white play now to punish this blunder d5?
I'm thinking of an attacker with rook e8, but then after king takes, queen can come to e6 and check again.
Yeah, you guessed the first move, so 1 point, but the explanation, the idea was to remove the defender. The bishop was not developed, it was captured. Queen captures on c8 check, look to your king. The king must move forward, and here the opponent is now going to lose in a few moves. How would you continue here with white?
I can check the king again on e6, queen e6.
So queen e6 is a good move, but what is another check that you have with your knight that you can use here?
Okay. Yes, I can make knight knight takes e5, because if pawn takes, then I get the queen.
Definitely, correct. So now after queen check, knight check, sorry, how do you finish the game?
How can I finish the game? I can finish the game with queen c7.
Queen c7, mate. And that is how the game ended. Very short game, miniature game, they call this one. It's a miniature loss. If you lose in less than 20 moves, they call it a miniature game. Now, of course,
Yeah.
The game was lost because chiefly this question was neglected. The opponent at least was trying to follow the first one, because this is the first question that every, is the, the funny saying, every Russian schoolboy is taught this question, right? Focus on the last move of the opponent. What does the opponent want to do? So the opponent at least was following this to some level, but this one, they were neglecting it. They were not careful before making their move to ask what does the opponent, or is my move a blunder? Because again, blunders happen because of oversights and or not being carelessness. So that's our lesson for today. Just run over time, but we can make a conclusion. So, what are some things that you have learned in today's lesson?
I think first time I've tried blindfold chess.
Yes.
And I like the approach about that strong way of thinking, about changing my way of thinking. And I think those two questions, I never asked those questions before making my move. I just move without calculation or thinking. I just move by instinct. Maybe that change will make me do less blunders and get more wins by those questions. Because now, when I will play, I now have two questions to make me think and instead of playing and play fast. So at least I know what to think now in between when it's my turn to play, what to move. And also just very recently that I've read and now I'm putting that in practice about those candidate moves. You know, previously when I play chess, I see the positions, and the first positions that comes into my mind, I go for it blindly. I don't think of any backup plans, any second options. But now I know the concept of candidate moves, so try to see what other options and try to select the best one from the candidate moves. But previously, I just one move and I go for it blindly. But now I know 2 or 3 moves can be considered, and just consider what would be the strength and the weakness of those moves, and then make your move. Yeah.
No, very
And
true.
I think you've put me 2 questions, and then you've put some examples. So now I see the questions and I see a visual as well, how to put that in practice.
Yes.
I think that's a good way for me to relate to that theory. There is something practical that then I can associate to that theory with practice.
Definitely. No, I'm glad to hear that. No, and that's true. I was particular on the point of candidate moves. The funny story that I read, I think it's in a book somewhere, that calculating the first move that comes to mind is like someone who wants to paint a house. So they take a ladder and they put the ladder on the first house they see and start painting, only to realize they are painting the neighbor's house. Right? They did not stop to see clearly which house it was. So yeah, it's always important to find more than one option. And like I said, calculation is what will get you to make the next step, because 99% of chess games are won because someone thinks better. It's not nice for us to hear that, but it is the simple fact that calculation is what makes someone a strong chess player. For mainly because some other things must be learned as well. But for now, our main plan will be working on calculation. So you asked for a training plan. So the training plan will be primarily to work on these 2 questions, to make a habit of them. So I'll create some examples for you to play further and ask yourself these questions. And that is the main plan for now. The short-term plan is to memorize the questions by head and then to start using them manually until it becomes easier to think without having to remember the whole thing, and playing through some examples. So I'll pretty much punch in similar examples as we did, and I'll put there white to move. But I think I'll have to create a Lichess study. Do you have a Lichess account, or you only have chess.com?
I have a Lichess account, yes, but I am more active on chess.com. But that's fine. I can use Lichess as well.
Okay, yeah, no, it's just
because at work there's a group that plays on Lichess.
Okay.
So I have a Lichess account as well.
Okay, yeah. So usually with Lichess, it's just because they have a nice option of creating a study. Otherwise, I can make a PGN. Which do you prefer, a PGN or a Lichess study?
I think let's use the Lichess if it is more practical. I think let's use the Lichess one.
Okay, that's good. All right, so we can do that. No, that's great. Thank you so much. I enjoyed the lesson, and yeah, hopefully you have already picked up some things you can start using right away, because that's usually the goal. The application process, what you have learned, start using it right away. Trial and error, ask questions, good feedback. That's how it will definitely become something that is part of your way of thinking.
All right, and you will email me the lessons and the.
Yes, I'll email the lesson exercises. I'll save So let's just confirm it so that I know what you want. So so I'll screenshot this, what we did, and then it's the exercises with the first blindfold puzzles. So is that right?
Yeah. And one thing, Dion, if I would like to replay the recording, how I do that?
Yes, I'll share the recording with you. I can upload it to the Elite Chess YouTube. I'll keep it as an unlisted video. Only you can see it. So I'll share the link with you, and then you can play it through.
No problem. I think that's good.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you so much, and I hope you have a good day.
Have a good day and a good week, and
Thank
I'll see you for the emails.
Yes. Okay, cool. Bye-bye. Thanks.